All right, welcome back. It is Tuesday, 7:52 p.m. Welcome back to Pump Up the Volume. I'm Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz, and I'm here today with my fellow co-host, Mr. Bill Bartholomew from the Bartholomew Town Podcast. Also, Mr. Roberto Gonzalez from Steambox, Rhode Island, as well as Mr. Pat Ford, founder of the Coalition Radio Network, and also the individual that has given us this medium to, again, amplify the voices of community and bring up the important issues that you all need to hear. We have a very special guest with us today, Miss Carlene Fonseca. I wanted to do a whole biography and introduction to Carlene, but she was pretty adamant that she wanted to really tell her story and share more about her background. So before we get to Carlene and give her the opportunity to share everything that Carlene is doing today, like running for local office, which is a very important thing to do for democracy, I did want to start the show off with a short segment for Bill to give us an update about the latest happenings here in the state of Rhode Island related to COVID, social justice issues, as well as mainstream politics, and possibly some of what's going on the national level that's bleeding into Rhode Island today. So, Bill, would you like to lead the way?
Sure, national level, as in the Libertarian Party candidates are going to be appearing on talk radio next week, or probably Kamala Harris being selected as vice president. I guess there it is. Ta-da!
Yeah.
In Rhode Island right now, it's interesting because we have this dynamic of what are the numbers. I was at an event this weekend with some friends, and it was interesting. We had this like 4-hour conversation around the fire in Newport. Everyone just saying, who do we believe? Not that we fundamentally want to distrust government or distrust anyone in the medical sector, but we see numbers spiking in Central Falls. We see Providence, Pawtucket, and you just look at the map, and then you also take a look at the situation with respect to tourist communities, Block Island, Newport, Narragansett. We know that COVID-19 is certainly still here and it's still spiking, but at the same time, there's significant questions about what source do we want to turn to for the most accurate information. The governor comes out every Wednesday and says, look, come here for the most accurate, up-to-date information. But then last week, she puts out statistics that are different than those of Johns Hopkins and their report. Today, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut removed Rhode Island from their travel ban list. We still are on Massachusetts' list of quarantine required. If you go there, you got to quarantine for 14 days or produce a negative test result. But all this being said, it looks like the governor's moving away from back to school on August 31st, which is obviously the right decision. I don't think anybody in their right mind would say otherwise, but she still hasn't announced it yet. And they're still painting a rosy picture that I know that Roberto and Dr. Munoz, from your role on the Equity Council, and from Pat, from your role in these press conferences, along with me, each and every Wednesday, we know that there's something that may not be nefarious, but is confusing at best. So bottom line is that it's a rambling way of saying COVID's here and people are confused.
Yeah, thanks so much for the update, Bill. We just saw a story in Georgia, a school system, over 800 students and teachers quarantined because that particular school district decided to not enforce mask wearing, which we all know was actually an option in guidelines. And so Rhode Island has a reason to be concerned. There's evidence to show that this is a risk, not only for children, but also for communities. And as we know, communities that are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 are also disproportionately impacted by, school systems that are falling apart, right? Educational disparities and a number of other issues that will essentially, not serve our communities well and put them at greater risk. So we all know that. And at this point, it is frustrating that we have to even repeat ourselves time and time again. We've been saying this since March, Bill, right? But here we are. And I guess the governor needed to see that other states, other people in other states were suffering in order to, decide not to move forward in August. Well, hopefully she sticks with that. So taking a step back from state level politics, let's now focus on our special guest, Ms. Carlene Fonseca. So I just want to say I'll let Carlene introduce herself, but Carlene is a dear friend. She is a fierce advocate for communities, community activist. She will challenge anyone that is not serving the interest of the people, and she has demonstrated time and time again that she has the courage to do that, and she is willing to sacrifice name, reputation, whatever she has to lift the people up, and that is an amazing thing to see in any political forum, but certainly in mainstream politics today, right, which we know is wrought with many individuals that don't seem to care about communities. But Carlene is not one of those. She cares, and this is why we have her on the show. So Carlene, please share more about your story, what you've been up to, and where your vision is taking you.
Absolutely. First, I want to say thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me another platform to get my story out and touch all of the people out there in Rhode Island who really want to be empowered and kind of make decisions on their own um, and be informed about what's going on, right? So, just a little bit about me. I am running for city council at large in Central Falls, and this would be my third full term on the council. And I went back and forth about if I should run again, and I think this time around, I'm really putting on the forefront my work with equity and articulating that better for all the residents out there, because at the end of the day, I think that's at the heart of all of our issues in this country. So just a little bit about my background. I grew up in Central Falls. I was born and raised here. My parents migrated in the 1980s from the Cape Verde Islands on the west coast of Africa, and they set up shop in Central Falls. My brothers and sisters all grew up here. We graduated from Central Falls High School and had the amazing opportunity to graduate number 1 and 2 in our class and go on to really great universities and colleges. So education is always at the forefront of everything that I do, because it's something that's empowering. It's something that nobody can take away from you. But I do realize that a lot of folks aren't, they don't have that opportunity, right? And it's on us to make sure that sometimes we have to give up our privilege, give up some things in life so that other people can join with us and move everything along. So after high school, I went to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. I majored in government. I always said I would come back and be the youngest mayor in Central Falls. Things didn't work out that way. And I think right now I'm focused more on this equity work. And so I then went on to get my master's at George Washington University in criminology. That's another issue that's near and dear to my heart. In Central Falls right now, 1 in about 4 children in Central Falls have a parent that is either incarcerated, paroled, or at one point was part of the criminal justice system. I worked for the federal government for a while under the Obama administration at the Agency for International Development while I was in grad school. And after that, my uncle passed away here in Rhode Island, and I said, it's time to move back. I always wanted to move back. I always said I would leave Rhode Island, because I think here in Rhode Island, like, a drive away, going to Cumberland, going to Warwick, it's like a journey away, right? And I think I just needed to expand my mind and see what the world has out there to offer. So then I moved back home, and I worked for a few campaigns, and then I decided to launch my own campaign. I worked at Blackstone Valley Prep when I first came back as the Dean of Operations at their middle school here in Central Falls. And then I went on to the Central Falls School District. I thought it was important for students to see people who look like them, who had the same experiences and could relate to them. So I was director of 21st century programs. I did a lot of career and technical education work in Central Falls, because I think a lot of our students whether they're going off to college or going off to like career and technical the workforce. I think they need more like soft skills and hard skills in order to be productive. And I wanted to introduce more of those opportunities in the district. And then 2 years ago, I went on to my current role at Providence College, and I serve as the associate director in the Feinstein Institute for Public Service. And I tell people we are kind of like the community arm of PC. We deal with a lot of community organizations. We place fellows and community work study students all around Providence and neighboring areas to work with community. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm running for city council again, focused really heavily on this racial equity platform. I identify as an African-American woman. I am part of the largest African-American sorority, Delta Sigma Theta. And I'm really proud of my heritage. And I want to just be a part in achieving racial equity in this world while I can, and to teach my daughter to stand up for what she believes in, no matter what, and no matter where it takes you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Carlene. And it's interesting, right? Because we graduated from Central Falls in different years. And so we really didn't connect. It was actually on the steps of the White House, or at least close to the steps of the White House. I remember Chris Potter, that's where we really all connected. And I would say at that point, it really seemed that the seeds that had been kind of sown in us in terms of our upbringing had really started to spring up, an interest in government, not only from an academic side, but really, I remember conversations that we had, right, about running and about the future and the impact that we could make. So it's just been amazing to have had that conversation. I mean, this is pre-medical school, right? This is like over 10 years ago. And to see how far you've come and how much of your visions really come to fruition, independent of whether you're mayor yet, the fact is that you've really taken all the steps to bring action, right, to the position that you've held in the past in terms of the council. And I've seen you on a debate stage. I've seen you call people out when they need to be called out and fight for programs to help youth. So that's amazing. So what I want to do is I kind of want to invite all of my co-hosts to really try to bring questions to you that embody some of the social and economic challenges that we're facing in Rhode Island. And on this show, at the end of the day, most of the things that we focus on is through the lens of racial, through a racial and equity lens, and many of the communities that we are talking about when we talk about the disregard of mainstream politicians are communities like Pawtucket, Central Falls, and Providence. So even though you are running for Central Falls, I want you to feel comfortable to address these issues from the perspective of what are pragmatic solutions, right, that you think that we can create to support communities. So with that said, I just wanted to frame it as best as possible, and then really to hand it off to Bill, Roberto, and Pat. And I would just ask, gentlemen, that you focus your speaking time to 1 to 2 minutes so that we can really give Carlene time to answer the questions. So with that said, let's go ahead and start with Pat.
Great. Well, it's great to meet you. We have a little bit of an echo here. My question revolves around gentrification. The city of Pawtucket, most notably, has an obsession with building taxpayer-subsidized development. I was with an organization that fought against the Pawsox, if you will, hostage taking of Pawtucket. But the question I always have for the community is, who is development supposed to be for? Is it for the community that's there, or is it to bring people in from the outside and redo the community? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's very timely. With the train station coming in and the development maybe of the soccer stadium that's going to come in and affect both Central Falls, Pawtucket, and Rhode Island as a whole. I think development in Rhode Island as is benefits those others. It doesn't benefit people who are already living in the community per se. For example, people say, "Oh, it's a good thing that the soccer stadium is going to come to Central Falls. Like your property is going to go up, right? Like property value will go up." I'm like, I'm not selling my house, so I don't. It doesn't matter to me if the property value goes up. My taxes will go up, right?
Right.
But I think as is, development in Rhode Island doesn't focus on the people currently living in those situations. They much rather bring outsiders in, right? They want to gentrify the neighborhoods, make it more white, to be frank, right? We talk about, oh, like if we the lofts that will be built. Somebody mentioned the other day, they were like, lofts are like little small apartments, right? Like white people took that and made it fancy, right? It's fancy now to live in a small apartment. Like somebody said it was a struggle. That's called struggle, right? Like how we
Bougie.
live, but like they just took that, right, and made it like a micro loft. Now it has a fancy name and a good background to it. So I think those developments that are coming in, they're not for the people. I've had conversations with people bringing in the soccer stadium. We asked them if there would be provision so that a certain number of Central Falls, Pawtucket residents had jobs there, and they weren't willing to put that into the contract or the law, whatever it is. Right? We talked about affordable housing. How many of those lofts are going to be affordable housing? Right? If you look at certain property in Central Falls, we already have a lot of those lofts, and people that live in the city can't afford it. Rent is more expensive than mortgage in Central Falls. We're one of the few communities that's the case. We have a 22% home ownership rate. So who do you think is going to leave? People are if prices go up, if rent goes up, people are going to jump off board somewhere. They're gonna move because they don't own their properties. The landlords, a lot of them that are absent, will raise the prices up, and that's gonna leave us in a hole, right? Because you bring a Starbucks to the neighborhood, and I think before we make those decisions, we have to ask the community, what do they want, right? Like, what do you want to see in your community? Is it a Starbucks? Is it a local mom and pop shop that's striving, that's on the border to succeed? I think we need to start making these decisions based on what people want instead of what developers and outside people coming to Rhode Island want.
Wow. Thank you. That
Awesome.
that nails it. Absolutely.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that, Carlene. So we're going to transition to Bill, but just one quick kind of end point to Pat's question, just like a secondary question. Is the current leadership in Central Falls more aligned with the people or with the developers?
I would say we need to be more in line. They need to be more in line with the people, right? I think back in 2016, I had gone to a National League of Cities conference, and we talked about transportation and what happens when transportation affects a city. And they said, planning, if you plan before, you're able to like see things down the road and not make certain mistakes. And I think in the city, we're not doing a great job of planning, right? Like we had a comprehensive plan. We put $100,000 into the budget, I think, for every year. And when I was on the council, I think we saw the beginnings of some, like maybe 20 slides on a comprehensive plan, but it was not comprehensive at all, right? And I think if you fail to prepare, then you're gonna fail, right? And we need to look at how we do contracts. We need to look at our hiring for people who are like minority women-owned businesses. We've done a lot of work in that, but I think we need to be more cognizant of the residents and people who are living here. Even basic things as road work, right? I had spoken to the planning director at one point, and I said, we need to inform residents, if you're going to be doing work on their street, then you should probably let them know before that work starts. So it's like little things that we can do to improve and make those and build trust. It really comes down to trust and with residents, right? So if you're putting more of that energy into developers and builders than your residents, then that's who you're pleasing.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for stating that, right? I mean, I think it is important to acknowledge where Central Falls is today, but also to your point, where the improvements could be made to help its residents. And so, Bill, you have a question next?
Yeah, when it comes to school funding, the funding formula in Rhode Island is inherently disruptive to fair and balanced education throughout the state, no more so than in Central Falls. I've had some teachers tell me that they've got $125 to spend for the whole year. From the perspective of a role on the council, whether you're speaking to just the bully pulpit that you'd have and potential access to lawyers and outside players, whomever it may be, or from an official standpoint, what can you do to try to raise awareness of the disadvantages that Central Falls faces as a result of ineptitude and unfair school funding formulas?
Absolutely. Where do I start? Right? Since I went to school, since my brother who graduated 15 years before me, it's always been a hot mess, right? From top down, bottom up, education in Central Falls has failed many of us. I don't use the word fail in a sense that completely failed me, because I say one thing that Central Falls did teach me is perseverance, because we didn't have everything that we needed. We didn't have all the resources, but I learned to persevere and find those resources on my own and with the help of mentors. So I will say that that's the biggest lesson I learned from Central Falls. And I think a lot of graduates would say that. I say it failed us because we didn't have the same educational opportunities as many other Rhode Islanders, and on one half, and then, at the national level. It was programs like ETS and Upward Bound and College Crusade that really helped a lot of us kind of get over that bump. But those programs weren't allotted to many people, and we need to make sure that those programs exist in Central Falls. So the funding formula really needs to be evaluated. The House bill, there's a House Bill 7575 that asks for equitable education. And I am strongly going to advocate for that bill, because until you make it law, right, like we have, until you make a right to an education, equitable education, cities like Central Falls are always going to be subpar. So until you make it law enforceable, people spend money on it, that's when it becomes a priority, right? I tell everyone education in Central Falls should be everyone's priority, because it comes from all your taxpayer dollars. If you're in Cranston and Barrington and Newport, you pay for Central Falls school students to attend school, right? And as is, we don't have, I think they laid off, however, 40 plus teachers. Like, that's ridiculous, right? In a school that's already suffering, right? Social emotional learning. We need a lot of other resources. 25% of our population is special ed, 25% is multilingual learners. And we need resources to make sure that teachers have what they have in their classroom, that they have outside support. There's counselors in the buildings, not cops. I really strongly believe in that. And that we're using those resources to further our students' careers. And I think we need to be more creative in education. I think this COVID situation is showing us that we need to be more creative. Our students are hands-on learners. Our students are multifaceted. Our students can juggle various things, and they need support. We need smaller classrooms, right? That's like a big thing. We really need to figure out smaller classrooms. We need to give teachers more professional development that they need, as well as some mandatory PDs on cultural competency, on equity work, on working with students from different cultures. Those are some of the PDs that I would like to see. I would love to see city dollars go into the education system. I know we don't fund the school district, but I think people have bypassed it because it's not in our budget. We don't have to really care about it. But I think as local leaders, we need to put education first for our students. And even if it's $20,000, if it's $50,000, that could provide professional development. That could provide field trips for students. When I was the CTE coordinator, I think that's the most field trips students in Central Falls have ever attended in one school year. In one day, I think when seniors were taking SATs or the PSATs, the other grades all went off to college tours. We went to UConn, we went to Rick, we went to Salve, we went to all these different schools that students wouldn't have the opportunity to go to. I found the funding to do it. And we went to different construction day. We went to the computer science day that Rhode Island held. And students kind of learned what they were passionate about. They got to explore. They got to see what they don't like, right? And we need to start offering, I think, more of those courses back into the school. When I was in school, we had like home ec and keyboarding, and we need to start offering some more of those classes as well as other trades, right? Like nursing. Central Falls has a lot of students who go into medicine and nursing and to go on to be doctors. But if we start that work earlier, then many of our other students will succeed.
Well, if I may, Carlene, I mean, you bring up a great point. I just need to lift up the fact that, while going through the Central Falls school system due to a lack of resources forced me to play a catch-up game in college, we also had some teachers that would go above and beyond for us, right? And if it wasn't for those teachers, we all have our own stories to tell. We wouldn't have even been able, right, to believe in ourselves enough to go to college. And so, Mr. Scapini, for example, History Tech, he after I graduated, spent years, over 5 years, I believe, trying to develop a vocational pipeline program for healthcare workers, right? It wasn't a pipeline to med school, but it was one to possibly nursing. And it was shot down. He put so much work into it and it was shot down. So now to kind of like take this to a little bit of an uncomfortable space, we have people on the board, those very people that come from where some of them anyway, grew up in Central Falls. They make those hard decisions of laying people off, laying people that are in that are managing the health education, right, within the school system, those that are those cultural competency roles that are really trying to serve as liaisons between families and the school. They will lay them off in an election year. In an election year, they will not challenge the very administration that is willing to cut funding. And then suddenly, in this election year, 4 years later, they're out there with microphones after they committed to the layoffs, protesting the lack of funding. And so, that's the unfortunate truth about Central Falls. That's a dynamic we see. People that know what the challenges are and compromise time and time again. And when the compromise comes back to hurt the community, they want to kind of slide into the crowd and start yelling with the community for more resources. And so I'm interested in getting a perspective from your perspective. How do you as a leader in the community kind of challenge the barriers that are built by other leaders in that community that are in positions of power, whether it's associated with the school district or in other institutions? Like, how do you confront that?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. And I agree, right? I say even now, right? Like 2014 or 2018, the governor election. A lot of people supported the governor, right? Especially in Central Falls. I think the entire Central Falls leadership supported her. And I always ask them, what has she done for you? What has she done for the city of Central Falls, right? When we need to pull ourselves up, we pull ourselves up. Look at this whole COVID situation, right? Like a lot of that work was done internally, and It wasn't done on the state level. Look at education. Nothing has really been done. So I say, why do you keep supporting the same people who fail your community over and over again? And with education, our commissioner lives in Central Falls. I don't know how many people know that. Our commissioner lives in Central Falls. And she sends her kids, whatever reason she wants, she can send her kids wherever outside, right? Even on the school board previously, and maybe now, I don't know the current landscape. We've had people who send their kids to private schools, to charter schools. And for me, as a new parent, that's telling me that our schools are not good enough for your kids, right? Because the mom and dad down the street, the grandma, she doesn't have another choice but to send her kid to Central Falls High School, to our elementary school, to Ella Risk. So when you have people who are representing the interests of the community and they're not sending their own kids to the school, that sends a bad message. And I tell people, if I continue my roles in Central Falls, I'm sending my daughter to the same schools I attended, because if I leave, then my voice leaves, right? And I think I that's a privilege I own. I can send my daughter wherever I want, but I'm choosing to send her to the local schools because I can make up for her education in other ways. And I think sometimes we have to give up a little privilege in order for other people to join us. So I think representation matters. It matters who's on the school board. It matters who's on the city council. It matters who's the mayor of a city or town. So yeah, that's what I'll say. Representation matters, and the representation doesn't always doesn't always represent the community that we're serving.
Yeah, well, thank you for acknowledging that as well, right? Because we know that to be an issue, and I hope that those people are listening. Because that was intentional. So, Roberto, what are your thoughts? I know you have a lot of thoughts. So, what is your question for Carlene today?
I'm going to stay relevant, man. I do want to point out quickly that our students developed this dope hackathon through the month of August, and it's been incredible. And our top story on IG right now is a student from Central Falls who had a great time during the hackathon, and she talked about how this is needed, and she passionately spoke about why this is needed in Central Falls. And I promise you, just like I promised her, I'm working on it. I'm talking to our superintendent, but that's a whole nother can of worms. My students, I have a lot of questions that I'd like to ask you as Roberto, but I can tell you that when we had the amazing Jessica Vega on our podcast, our students had a lot of questions about the Wyatt, the detention center that's right there, right on the baseball field in Central Falls. Now, if I was a powerhouse, amazing city councilor, what can I do to make this situation right? Because we talk about representation matters, but like, what does that say? You know what I mean? About where their families are and how their families are. And my students do recognize that just getting the Wyatt out of Central Falls doesn't make it square, doesn't make it right for the detainees. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are, what kind of power, positions, plans you might have to rectify that situation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Roberto, for all that you do for our kids. And thank you for the question. The Wyatt. Whew. Wyatt. So I was one of those kids who grew up. I played softball, I played soccer all my 4 years across the street, right? And that's where we practiced. That's where we would hear the hooting and the hollering because you can see it, right? Like you can see, they can see us. There was no barrier. There's no barrier, right? So it sent, from a very young age, it just turned me off. It sent a bad message to youth in Central Falls that, in 4 years, that's where you can end up, right? Like easily. So, and then as I grew up, like still seeing that there, still seeing the football and Panthers like playing across the street from there, it's really disheartening. And I've been, I think, the biggest champion for a community center in Central Falls. And one of the recommendations from the current administration was to buy out the Wyatt Detention Center, the training center, to use that as a community center. And I said no. I think I was the only person that voted against that, because while I'm the biggest champion for the community center, I don't want it located next to the prison, right? The prison may disappear, but it's there now, and I don't want next generation of students to experience what I've experienced. As far as its removal and getting it out there, I think those conversations started from outside pressure. It's been there for a while, and I didn't hear a lot of people kind of speaking up on it until outside pressures kind of forced those conversations. So for me, I think we need to, I know people don't want to work with the current administration there, but I think we do need to work with them to figure something out. It's a private public domain, and I think that as a community, we need to join all of our forces to try to get the Wyatt Detention Center out of there. So I don't have all the answers as to the removal, but I'm willing to work 100% with the community to figure out a plan. And I think it may go above the city. I think we're going to need state support on that too, and maybe federal support because it is federal. So I think it's not a single-pronged answer. I think it's multifaceted, and we need to work different angles in order to get it out of there. It's not an easy thing to do.
If I could just jump in very quickly on that subject, I'm probably the only person on this, if you will, virtual room who's old enough and was politically active at the time that the Wyatt was actually built. And if we need to get rid of the Wyatt in any means possible, but there should be a picture somewhere in state government that can be seen by everyone, probably right in, as I call it, Halitosis Hall, because when it comes to economic racism, the Wyatt Detention Center should be the poster child of economic racism, because the promises that were made to the Central Falls community and the reality of it are so conflicted and so terrible, and that has been such a drag on the community, never mind a complete failure economically, that folks need not ever forget that. Anytime someone comes along, some carnival barker of a politician comes along and says, we're going to save your community, but effectively in order to save it, we're going to have to burn the village. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for pointing that out, Pat. And Carlene, thank you so much for taking the time to share your perspective on these important issues. My hope is that our listeners were able to better understand, where you come from, like what your work is about, and really where your heart resides. And as we all know on the call, it's with the community. So, we wish you the best of luck, fight the fight, don't give up, and just keep on doing what you're doing because it's right. So with that said, Carlene, we also do a very kind of a traditional thing here on Pump Up the Volume. We take a few seconds to share our outrage, something that's going to continue to keep us up at night until we, see that change through, whatever that thing is. And so everyone has a few seconds to do that. We will let you start off with, what is that thing that's keeping you up at night that you're going to want to fight for, which I know it's a lot, but if there's one thing that stands out, please feel free to share.
Yeah. Can I say that one thing and then just make another quick point, if possible?
Yeah, make a plug. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I would say representation. That's what keeps me up at night. And one of my initiatives is to put through community empowerment councils. So it's residents who join this program and learn all about their government, learn all about education, the city finances, boards in the city, and kind of run off and are empowered to make their own decisions and join causes that are representative of themselves. So I would say representation, making sure everyone not only has a seat at the table, but has a chance to pick out the menu as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Carlene. All right. So Bill, would you like to go?
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So Bill's going next. So just wait up for just a quick sec.
Yeah, real quick. look, we've got to adapt our elections to the modern era right now that we're in, and that would include debates. I've been asked to moderate some debates here in the state. I'm not going to say which candidates, but I've had some people who have used the lack of an audience or the situation being put on Zoom as a way to weasel out of them. And some of these are some of the most powerful people in the state. It undermines the electoral process. It was an election process. It was a bad precedent set by both Alan Fung and by Governor Raimondo in the last gubernatorial election. And it was a bad precedent set by media outlets when they excluded Dr. Munoz, Ann Armstrong, and what's his name? How good is that for name recognition? Bill
Gilbert. Yeah,
Bill Gilbert. Yeah, that's how strong his campaign was. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, but come on, at least Dan Armstrong got a little attention blowing, weed in people's face or whatever it was. But Dr. Munoz should have been on those debate stages. It's a bad precedent, and it needs to be corrected immediately. And the Senate president should step up.
Thanks, Bill. Awesome. Pat, 45 seconds here.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Bill, great sentiment, and I hope you guys will all, at least philosophically, support our attempt at the Libertarian Party's attempt to get our national presidential candidate on the presidential debate stage, which leads me to my next, what's going to keep me up at night for the next couple nights, Kamala Harris. For the love of God. Or in the words of the immortal, it was a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it plays out. How in the hell in the world that is 2020, when racial divisiveness is ripping this country apart, the Democratic Party could put together the two most loathsome creatures imaginable. As I pointed out on the Facebook this afternoon, how is it possible that somehow both national parties came up with more disgusting candidacies for national office this year than 2016? I didn't think it was possible. Kudos to the Democratic Party for bringing in someone who was an atrocious attorney general, used the worst of American politics, which ironically were engineered by Joe Biden in the Senate, right, to turn our neighborhoods, particularly the urban core, the inner cities, into police-armed battlegrounds. The very architects of the underpinnings of things like stop and frisk, and the jump out boys in Providence, all over this country, these two individuals have a legacy of racial destruction. Wow. Joe Biden somehow just managed, I believe, to potentially hand the election to Donald Trump. Yikes. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Roberto?
We talk about it all the time at Steambox, and representation is important. That's become our mantra since a non-binary, queer, multiracial person from Marvel Comics was our guest on the podcast, and we talked about how important that was for the students. Carlene, I'm with you. I think you're completely right on that. And that's why I'm so torn today to agree with Pat, right? Because there's a person of color nominated for vice president, and yet at the same time, to me, in the age of the revolution of defund the police, how freaking tone deaf is it to nominate the person who just had so many people locked up and did so much damage to the communities of color? Kamala Harris is a dope name. Kamala Harris has a dope look. Kamala Harris has a bullshit past, and it's eating me up inside because I wish that the choices were better this November. I know Pat can school us on other choices, but that'll be for another time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Roberto, for sharing that. So really, I came in and my outrage, I think, just because of the work I do, it is always, at least more recently, focused on COVID, right? Like on the stupidity at this point that we're seeing with our political leaders in terms of the decisions they're making. And I don't use that word lightly, but it is, when you're not following the science, it is stupid. Where we're acting like we're cave people 1,000 years ago before we understood the principles of the scientific method here. But while that may be a consistent outrage that I have on a daily basis in terms of fighting, these systems and these politicians and their irrational arguments, the fact is I'm kind of, I've I've been taking bits of what everyone's saying, and it's true. Like I'm just like I'm outraged by the fact that the Democratic Party in particular doesn't learn, and they continue to assume that the people don't see through candidates and can't see those candidates that are being puppeted as compared to those that are showing their true colors. And so here we have, kind of two presidential candidates. We have one who what they are, and you don't like them, but you know what they are. You have another candidate where you wonder, like, should I actually be interviewing the people that are behind them? Should I interview his chief of staff, his executive assistant? Who should I be interviewing? Who's going to be making the decisions ultimately? And so, when you think about the complexity of that hypothetical, you almost wonder, would you rather fight the person that you should be fighting, or be looking for a fight but not know who you should be fighting? Because that's what we're really up against when it comes to national politics. And I can't say that that's in any way disconnected from what we go through here in Rhode Island, in a state that is primarily quote unquote blue, but we see deals being made across the aisles. We see R's running as D's. We see D's that should be running as R's. And frankly, we see Democrats that actually don't even care about Rhode Islanders, don't hire Rhode Islanders. They don't invest in Rhode Islanders. And at the end of the day, they pretty much don't listen to anything Rhode Islanders have to say. But you're not one of those people, Carlene. And I just want to end on that note, right? Because aside from my outrage, what gives me hope is that there are individuals like you that are continuing to push back, that are creating a path, right, to make that change. And my hope is that you would continue that vertical path. And if and where and whenever you decide to take those later and next steps, we'll be here to support you. So thanks so much, Carlene. With that said, thank you for joining us on Pump Up the Volume. Join us next Tuesday at 7:30, where we'll be amplifying the voices of communities and bringing you the information that the establishment does not want you to know. All right. Thanks a lot. All right. Take care, everyone.